Hello, welcome to this webinar where we will be discussing data logging in GP Pro EX. This is in fact not a new subject, but rather an update and a refresh on the data logging functionality within GP Pro. So just a real brief agenda here. We'll get into a functional description of how data logging works within GP Pro EX, and then I will show you in GP Pro EX how it looks to set that up in the software itself. Note that all HMI models and WinGP, which is the Windows runtime for a GP Pro EX project, support data sampling. There are some differences in functionality based on the hardware in the software, basically based on the hardware platform that you are using. Okay, so what is the sampling feature? So this is straight from the manual, and I think it's a pretty straightforward thing. I'll kind of just walk you through that. It's basically what we're doing is we're taking a sample of data from a desired memory location or a PLC address at a designated time and storing that into the display unit's memory, of course. So then this is useful for viewing and logging data histories. In GP Pro EX, that collected data by the sampling feature is called sampling data. And then in GP Pro EX, we can view that sampling data as a line graph or in a table. We can also save that and essentially back that data up to external memory as a CSV file. If we look at the internal memory structure of GP Pro EX, it's important to understand how this is related to data logging. So essentially, by default, what happens is, and especially in HMI platforms, the logging is done directly to non-volatile RAM. So sometimes in GP Pro, depending on the hardware or depending on the terminology that's used, sometimes you'll see the terms non-volatile RAM or NVRAM, and sometimes you will see the term SRAM. They are essentially the same thing and performing the same basic functionality in the HMI. So you can see what's happening here. This is just a little slide showing you how that backup memory is broken out. Okay, some other notes about sampling data. Again, so the sample data can be displayed in a table or chart form. The data in the table can be sorted and filtered, except in basics HMI, so you can sort and filter the data in the table. And then again, the data can be backed up as a CSV file, and then that CSV file can be retrieved via FTP. Okay, so what are the steps that happens when we do data sampling? So essentially what we're doing is, again, we're either taking from an external PLC if we're so connected, or if we are, so for example, using our EX runtime has the PLC, this would just be variables from the EX PLC, but essentially we're getting the memory, the desired device memory that we want, and then we're going to log it to backup memory based on our command, right? So step A is data is read from the device and stored in the HSI memory. Okay. Another thing that we can actually do, and this is a backup to external storage. So what we can actually do is we can extend the non-volatile RAM to external storage, either a SD card or a USB stick. And what that essentially does is that data is not readable on the external storage, but what it essentially does is it allows you to, in a trend graph, for example, you can reach farther into history than the SRAM can actually show you. You can actually reach into the USB memory or the SD memory to view additional data that is beyond what's in the SRAM. Okay, and then of course we have the C. We also used step C, which is the save as backup to external storage, and that's different than this backup. In this case, this is a procedure where we're taking a snapshot of what's in SRAM only, and we're taking that and we're creating what's in SRAM at the time that we do the backup. We save it as a CSV file to external storage. So difference between these two things, even though they're both called backups, that does get a little bit confusing. So note, this is a backup in terms of extending the SRAM so we can view the data in a trend graph. And then this backup is essentially taking a snapshot of the SRAM, creating a CSV file, and storing that to external storage. Okay. Step D here is I can also write sampling data to internal devices. So if, for example, when we're transferring a project, we're going to lose our sampling data. So we want to retain that sampling data. We could, of course, back it up, but if we want to, we can also write that data to internal device, store it to a non-volatile internal device, and then transfer it back. Okay. So again, this is the configuration steps that we'll use when we go into into our GP Pro EX environment. The first step is we create our sampling groups. We set the addresses / memory addresses to sample. And then we are talking about configuring the sampling action settings. And when we're talking about action settings, we're referring to the sampling conditions. So how are we taking our sample? Is it based on pure time or is it event? And then we also have handshaking bits to indicate that the data is full, and that we can also have a bit to actually clear the data. Okay. Then you can see here, CSV settings include a control word address for backing up, and the CSV settings allows for formatting of the table, including header rows, etc. Okay. So that's all we're going to show here in the PowerPoint. So let's go live into GP Pro, and I'll show you what it looks like in the GP Pro environment. Okay, so here we are in an existing GP Pro project and environment. And in this webinar, I will not go into all the different settings. There's quite a lot in here, and this webinar is not all encompassing for all the settings. So I'm going to focus on the main ones that we're going to focus on today in the webinar. So the first thing is, let me walk you through an existing data log and how that's set up, and then real quick, we'll go through just setting up one from scratch. So what you can see here is the first thing you'll notice is if I go over here to the sampling area, this is under the common settings. Again, this is, if you're not familiar with GP Pro, again, I'm not getting into, hopefully this webinar assumes you know the basics of how to navigate and get around, etc. in GP Pro. So we're going to go to the sampling area, and then we have basically our sampling group list. So in our sampling group list, this is where we're defining, we can have different sampling groups, and then within each group we have different sampling schemes, so to speak. Okay, so in this case, I just have the one, I've made some comments, etc. And then the real heart of it is if we go into the actual sampling area itself, you can see I just have a real simple setup here. I'm logging one 16-bit word. Okay, so this is where I'm setting up the addresses that I want to log. You can then, if I switch to this mode tab, now here you can see this is where we're setting. So what is the condition that we will sample on? And then what you'll notice is we have different selections. In my case, for this sample project, I just did a very simple constant cycle, which means I sample basically however often I want to. In this case, I set it for a constant sample of every 3 seconds. So you'll also notice you can do it based on a set time. So you just basically, this is just saying so we have a permit address, and then we can set a set time that we'll sample at, and then the frequency during that time. There's our constant cycle. We can also say we can do a constant cycle while bit is on. So we could just say, okay, when this bit is on, cycle sample like this. And then we can sample on literally bit on, or bit change. Okay, let me just go back here to our constant cycle. Okay, and you'll notice what happened is I actually cleared out the existing settings that I had. So in this case, I'll just set this back to what I had as 3 seconds. Okay, and then the first thing to kind of notice as we move on here is the next thing that I'm setting is this is the number of occurrences. So what this is doing is this is effectively allocating how much space in the non-volatile RAM that you are going to allocate for this sampling group. And remember, you have only a limited amount of of non-volatile RAM in your HMI. So this occurrences you have to be a little bit careful with. But remember, we do have the ability to view data beyond the occurrences, and we also have the ability to back up the data. So the concept is that we use as much of the SRAM as we possibly can during the runtime, and then when we fill it up, we either extend it to external memory or we back it up to external memory. Okay, so for example, I'll just go ahead in here and put in 1,000 occurrences. And now here you'll also see here's those handshaking signals that I was referring to. This is where we're going to define when the data is full, what happens. Here's an address that tells me that the data is full. You'll see if I go into this extended area, you can also say, do I want to add time? That's typical. I'm just going to leave everything at default for now. Okay. You'll also notice you do actually have the ability to just choose whether you want to save the data to SRAM or not. So that is up to you. And then here you'll notice this is the backup area. So this was the area that is saved in binary format, but allows you to extend the SRAM onto external memory. So what you'll notice here is that when I say that I'm going to save it in an SD card and I give it a backup count of 100 blocks, you'll see I take my 100 blocks times my 1,000 occurrences, and that actually means that I have the ability to look back through these many samples in a trend graph. Okay. So moving on to the next tab, what we'll see here is we'll see we simply have basically this is where we're defining how we will display the data in table form in the HMI and what the format is of the CSV file when we do a backup. Okay, so you'll see what I have here. So I'm going to enable the CSV file. I'm going to use custom settings. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that you have a CSV control word address. So this is the address that is controlling our backup. Okay, and I'm not gonna get into the whole how the backup functions here in this webinar, but this is how we are controlling the backup. You'll also see here, do I want to back it up to USB or SD? Do I want to append a file name or a date and time to the file name? If you look over here, very important, if you want to be able to search and sort through your table, you just simply enable that here. Okay. And then when you come back down to here, and then when you come down to here, you also see this is where I'm formatting what my table will look like. And you see you have different options for how you can set up these tables. For example, if I click on a column here, I can go into the column details, and this is where I can set my formatting for color and date format. If I go to time, here again, I go to column details, and I can format my column. Just like here, I can go into this and do column details, etc. Okay. Then moving on, so that's really what I wanted to show you. That's the main. You'll see there's other tabs here. I'm not going to get into that for this webinar. Like I said, you had the ability to write data to internal storage was one of the things. Okay, so back here in our main EX environment, through the magic of video editing, what I'm going to show here is just what this looks like real quick when we set up a new sampling data. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say in the sampling menu here, I go ahead and I do a right click, and I'm going to say I want a new sampling group number, and I'll say I'll make it pump 2, for example. Okay, so now that I'm in pump 2, I'm going to go ahead and define the address. I'm going to select random. That's typically, unless you're going to log a bunch of sequential addresses, that's typically what you're going to do, but you'll notice that you do have the ability to do it sequentially. And then I'm just going to go ahead and pick oops, I don't want that. I'm just going to pick one of the counters that I have running. I have a little logic program running here, and I just select my CV, for example. Now I've set that. Now I go in here into mode, and again, just like we saw, I'll just say constant cycle, every 3 seconds, 1,000, etc. I think it's pretty straightforward from here. So then again, then you would go in here and set your display settings, etc. Okay. So what that'll end up look like is just to show you what that looks like on a screen based on my formatting for that other, we go back to my formatting here, you can see this is how I formatted my table. So what that looks like on a screen. So if I go, so here I am back in my screen, and you can see here's where I have that table set up here. And what that is if just so you can kind of see, here's the date, time, and then the column name, which is the data that I'm logging. You can see a pretty simple table. And where that table comes from is that is under the parts menu, and that is basically the sampling data display. So this is the sampling. I'll just put one here. Yeah, and you can see you can only have one per screen, but that's so. Let me delete that one. Then if you go into you can see this is the programming for that sampling data display. Okay, and you can see here this is a trend graph, etc. Okay, this is just a little sample screen that I made. Okay. So that's all I had for the webinar for today. Hopefully this was useful and you got some additional information about data sampling in GP Pro EX. Feel free to leave any comments, and also if you have any suggestions for future technical webinars discussing anything to do with GP Pro EX, please let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching.